Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today, we're venturing into the chilling world of witches. So, grab your favorite snacks and drinks, but make sure to keep the lights on. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on future goosebump-inducing stories. Now, let's plunge into the darkness together. First story. She got expelled from her program because of bad marks. She was only halfway through her lease and didn't see a point in staying in Seattle since she was only there for school. She told me that if I wanted to take over her lease as a subletter, she would only charge me half the rent, which I thought was a pretty sweet deal. So naturally, although I am from this town, I thought it was time to leave my parents' place. I had already graduated, and although I had been looking for a new job for a while, I still felt like I couldn't miss out on the opportunity. So I took over her lease and moved into her place. The house itself is actually pretty nice. It's 3 floors, including the basement. And it's located near the University of Washington, which is not a very safe area overall. But I spent a lot of my university years here and never felt unsafe. The room in the basement is pretty small, but cozy. The only other room down here belongs to a girl who is currently a student, and she's pretty quiet. Actually, all the girls living here are pretty good roommates. I wasn't thrilled about living with 3 girls, but now I don't see why I would have thought it was an issue. They are pretty great and a good time. I'm the only one in the house who is not a student, and also the only one who is originally from Seattle. The other roommates are from cities that are only about an hour or 2 away at most. So, unless there's something special going on, they all go home on weekends. My friend who got expelled also only lives 2 hours away, so she would always go home for the weekend as well. One thing I forgot to mention, which is pretty crucial to the story, is that the house actually has 5 rooms. But right when they all moved into the new place together, one of the girls had a seizure on her bed and passed away. This was pretty upsetting for everyone, and the landlord told them not to worry about finding anyone else. The rent never went up or anything, and the room was left vacant. According to the landlord, he just found it insensitive to try and find someone because he didn't want to turn someone's death into a financial inconvenience for him. So, after the girl's death, the parents came and took her belongings out of the room, and it just remained empty since then. I actually never looked in there because it just remained locked, and I don't really have much curiosity to see the room. It's on the 2nd floor, and I never go up there, so I never paid any attention to it. The first weekend I spent there was pretty uneventful. I remember that I spent one night at my boyfriend's place, and then the next night he slept over after we went out drinking at one of the college bars near the place. We were pretty wasted, so we passed out as soon as we got home. The next weekend, I was at home in my new room, and I couldn't sleep, so I decided to read a little bit. I was really enjoying the quietness of this new house since the girls weren't home at all. I come from a Latino family, so this quiet and serene environment was pretty rare. I thought that I heard a few noises upstairs, so I figured that one of the girls had probably decided to stay the weekend at the house, or she was just getting last-minute things ready before heading home. I didn't think much of this since I wasn't very close with the roommates, so I didn't even bother asking them if any of them had stayed home. I just felt like it was none of my business. The girl in the basement was for sure gone for the weekend because she apparently sleeps with her door locked and keeps it open when she's not home. One weekend that same month, I woke up to pee, and I could hear a toilet flushing upstairs, which was kind of weird since I knew that none of the girls were home. I was going to go check it out, but in my tired state, I was too lazy and just didn't care enough. It's funny. Horror movies are supposed to make you paranoid, but the biggest lesson I got from them was that there's always a rational explanation for things. This would prove to be my biggest mistake because, for a couple of months, I was always brushing things off and ironically creating irrational explanations to rationalize what I thought were irrational thoughts. For example, I heard creaking coming from the second floor and figured one of the girls must have forgotten something and decided to come by to pick it up. The girl must have driven 2 hours down and 2 hours back to her town in the middle of the night to pick something up. One Saturday, I woke up to get some water and noticed that the roommate in the basement was gone. Her door was open and her car was not in the driveway. There weren't any cars in the driveway, but I should mention that one of the girls doesn't drive. A couple of hours later, I woke up because I heard steps coming down into the basement. At this point, I yelled up the girl's name who doesn't drive because she is the only one who could have been in the house. I didn't get a reply and just heard the steps going back upstairs. At this point, I started getting uneasy about being home on weekends, so I decided just to spend them at my boyfriend's house. One of the girls made a house Facebook page, which was supposed to address any issues like washing dishes or leaving messes, but it remained pretty inactive since everyone seemed to get along. I posted on there that some creepy stuff was happening on weekends and asked them if they could start letting me know if they'd be home for the night or not. They seriously thought I was joking around. The replies were not receptive at all and consisted of laugh out loud and "Oh my God, you're so funny." Even my boyfriend agreed that I was being paranoid because he too believed that everything had a rational and perfect explanation. The thing is, when you say that everything has an explanation, you are only invalidating paranormal explanations or ghostly activity, which is not what I was implying at all. I've never believed in ghosts or spirits or any of that jazz, and I never claimed to when I spoke to my roommates or to my boyfriend. They kept saying that the house was old and made noises, but I know the difference between old house noises and someone walking down the stairs and back up the stairs. Fortunately, my roommates did start posting things on the Facebook page to let me know they'd be gone. It was always to the effect of, "Hey, I won't be home this weekend, so don't worry about the ghosts." One weekend, they let me know that they would not be home, and my boyfriend was on the midnight shift, so I had to spend the night on my own. My boyfriend called me on his break while I was on the phone with him. I heard noises on the main floor. I told him I was going to go check it out, and he told me to go ahead because that idiot still thought I was just being paranoid. As I said this, I heard the footsteps going back up to the second floor. Once I got onto the main floor, there was nobody in the kitchen, and all the doors into the house were locked. I was extremely paranoid and didn't feel safe. My boyfriend called me down and convinced me that everything was okay, so I never went to the second floor, and it's probably best that I stayed on the main floor. After the weekend, I told my roommates in all seriousness that I was convinced that someone had been in our house at some point that night. I told them what I heard, and all those idiots still claimed that it was the old house making noises. My boyfriend was almost permanently on midnight shifts, so I did what I never wanted to do and started spending weekends at my parents' place. The girls still posted on the page whether or not they were leaving the house, and I decided that I should do the same. So I also started posting when I was and was not sleeping at the house. One Friday night, the Facebook page looked something like this: Roommate 1, not sleeping at home. Roommate 2, not sleeping at home. Roommate 3, staying home because of midterm exams. Me, I'm staying at my parents'. The next morning, I received a frantic text from one of the roommates saying that the roommate with the midterms had been attacked. Apparently, she was in her room studying and heard a noise right outside of her bedroom. When she went out to inspect it, she was greeted by a man walking out of the dead girl's room. I later found out more details about the whole thing from the roommate who was attacked. The man looked rough, with greasy hair and just a dirty face. When they made eye contact, he held up his finger to his mouth and uttered a shh while smiling. The nail on his finger was long, and his beard was apparently really scraggly and uneven, like it only grew in certain parts of his face. She screamed out of instinct, even though she knew there was nobody in the house. He lunged at her as she tried to shut the door, and she wasn't beaten up too badly. He just growled and told her to shut her mouth and said something like, "I'm not going to hurt you, but keep your mouth shut." He beat her, but not completely unconscious. When he walked out of her room, he went downstairs and walked out the front door. He left the dead girl's room unlocked, but the roommate locked herself in her room and called the police, who were there immediately. What's pretty creepy about the whole thing is that when they inspected the dead girl's room, they kept asking for clarification. So nobody has lived in this room for how long? Nobody has been renting this room, right? Did the parents take everything after the girl passed away? The guy had a stash of food, clothes, and even a sleeping bag in the closet, along with some disturbing drawings and notes. It became clear that he had been living in that room for months, only coming out when he thought the house was empty. The police assured us that they would patrol the area more frequently, but none of us felt safe anymore. I decided to break my lease and move back in with my parents permanently, and the other girls did the same. The landlord eventually boarded up the dead girl's room, but I still can't shake the feeling that the man is out there, waiting for another opportunity to find a place to hide. Every creak and groan in my parents' house now sends chills down my spine, a constant reminder that sometimes the real monsters aren't the ones we can't see, but the ones hiding in plain sight. Second story. When Lisa was 24, she was looking for her first apartment and moving out of her parents' house. Her boyfriend didn't want to move in together since they had only dated for a few months, so she instead opted to search for a roommate online. Browsing Craigslist, she found an ad titled something like "Roommate Wanted, Females Only." This sort of thing was common, since the area she was looking in was mostly young professionals. The listing was for a room in a house for about $450 a month, which was quite cheap compared to most places listed. The occupant listed herself as a 26-year-old graduate student who wasn't comfortable living with any males. The new roommate would have their own room and attached bathroom. So far, Lisa was interested in this place. However, the listing only had a single photo from outside the property. Lisa sent an email wanting to meet the occupant and tour the house. Within 30 minutes, she received an email back with all the details and a time to stop by. The girl worked late hours and wanted Lisa to stop by at 8 p.m. when Lisa arrived. There was a handwritten note on the front door saying, "Dr. Broken, use back door." Walking around the house, it looked nice, but slightly unkempt. Tall grass, weeds, dusty windows, etc. Still, no alarms went off for Lisa. When she knocked on the back door, a man opened it. At first, Lisa thought she had the wrong house, but the man reassured her and said that the occupant, Emily, was out, and he was the landlord. Emily had asked him to meet Lisa since she was working late. He seemed pleasant and offered to show her around. Alarms started going off, but they weren't at red alert yet. First, the guy was clearly in his 40s, unshaven, and looked like he lived in his car. Also, only the kitchen light was on. As they walked around the house, Lisa noticed one huge red flag. No furniture. Nothing. The landlord was polite about answering questions, but seemed irritable about keeping lights on for too long, rushing her around, and only letting her look at rooms for a few moments. There was a single room that the landlord wouldn't open, saying it was Emily's room, and he didn't want to invade her privacy. As they walked down the hallway into the living room, she noticed the front door had a plank nailed across it. Broken, for sure. Lisa's creepy meter was starting to ding, so she decided to wrap up the walkthrough and leave, but trying to be polite. As she was giving the guy her thanks for the showing, he perked up and stated that he forgot to show her the basement, which was recently furnished and would be a great rec room. He insisted she should take a look down there. At the time, Lisa and the landlord were standing in the small hallway between the living room and the back kitchen, and this little hallway was near the basement door. When he opened the door, it opened outward to create something of a barrier between Lisa and the back door. The basement was pitch black. He smiled, motioned downstairs, and said, "Ladies first." What happened next was nothing more than a stroke of luck. Lisa got a text just as a random person parked in front of the house. Thinking on her feet, she pretended it was a phone call and answered her phone. "Hey, yeah, are you here? I'll come out from around back and let you in. It's great. You have to see it." With a motion of confidence, she excused herself around the landlord and walked out of the back door. She said the guy just looked at her, confused. Once outside, she sprinted to her car and sped out of there. When Lisa got home, she told her mother and brother everything. Cops were called. They took her statement and went to investigate. The Craigslist post had been removed. The house had been foreclosed over 6 months earlier, and the property had been abandoned. When the police investigated, they found that the closed room the landlord didn't want her to look in was where the man had been staying. There was a pile of old, dirty blankets, rotten food, and empty gallon jugs everywhere. More disturbingly, he had plastered ripped-up pages from adult magazines on all the walls in the room. The real scary part was the basement. The man had tied a thin piece of fishing twine about shin level across the stairs about halfway down. The basement was full of old blankets, a broom handle wrapped in leather belts, and a small box with a few rolls of assorted tape, duct, electric, etc. The police managed to track down the man a week later. He was found squatting in another abandoned house nearby. During questioning, he revealed that he had been watching the house for months, waiting for the right moment to lure someone into the basement. He had a history of violent assaults and was wanted in several states. The authorities were shocked by the level of premeditation and how close Lisa had come to being another victim. Lisa decided to move back in with her parents temporarily and was more cautious with online listings. The experience left her deeply shaken, and it took months before she felt safe living on her own again. The abandoned house was eventually demolished, but the terrifying memory of that night still haunts Lisa, a constant reminder of the real dangers that can lurk behind seemingly innocent opportunities. A few months ago, I was moving to a new city to start my first job. Normally, I lived in a small town more than 70 kilometers away, so I needed to find a place to stay. I found an affordable room in a 3-story building that was mostly rented by young professionals. The flat I was supposed to live in had a long, narrow corridor behind the door. On the right, there were 2 doors. The first led to a room where my future roommate was supposed to live, and the second to a kitchen, practically combined with a bathroom. Far from ideal, but it was an old building. At the end of the corridor was a large room that I would be renting. My first roommate, Elena, was a friendly woman who occasionally cooked, which was a lifesaver for someone like me who could barely boil water without burning it. Unfortunately, Elena had to leave suddenly for a job transfer, and my new roommate moved in. His name was Jake, a 30-year-old software developer. Despite living together for nearly half a year, we barely spoke. Our schedules were completely opposite. One day, the landlord called me. Mr. Harris was an elderly man with terrible teeth, but a decent landlord. He once returned extra rent I had accidentally paid. He owned several flats in the city rented to young professionals. He asked me to keep an eye on Jake, hinting that something was off. Apparently, Jake had a violent outburst at work and was rambling incoherently when Mr. Harris met him about the rent. Later that evening, I returned to the flat to find the kitchen in shambles. Cabinets were broken, and the contents were strewn everywhere. Jake was pacing around, muttering to himself. He mentioned something about a party gone wrong, but I didn't press for details. Despite the odd behavior, I chalked it up to a rough day and went to bed, pushing a table against my door just in case. Around 3 a.m., I was jolted awake by Jake pounding on my door, screaming for me to let him in. His voice was frantic and angry. I refused, but he kicked the door open, sending the table skidding across the floor. He barged in, wild-eyed, shouting that he knew I was spying on him. He didn't attack me physically, but kept screaming and knocking over furniture. I was terrified and texted my friend Mark, who lived nearby. For the next hour, Jake ranted about hidden cameras and government conspiracies. He tore apart the flat, looking for bugs. At one point, he found my gloves and accused me of planning to strangle him with them. I was paralyzed with fear, unable to leave because he was blocking the only exit. Finally, in a moment of lucidity, Jake agreed to let me leave if I promised not to call the police. I grabbed my phone and fled in my pajamas, taking refuge in a 24-hour diner down the street. Mark met me there, and we called the police together. They arrived at the flat, but Jake had already fled. The next day, Mr. Harris called me. Jake had returned, barricading himself in the flat and screaming about being watched. The police came again, this time in force, and had to break down the door to get to him. They found him raving and tearing the place apart, convinced he was being monitored. They took him away, but the experience left me shaken. The police later told me they found a hidden stash of drugs in Jake's room, which explained his paranoid behavior. Apparently, he had been using a potent mix of hallucinogens and stimulants. The flat was trashed, and I had to find another place to live. I still have nightmares about that night, and the idea of having another roommate sends chills down my spine. I doubt I'll ever trust living with a stranger again. Thank you, everyone, for joining me on this incredible journey. Your support, likes, and subscribes have truly meant the world to me. As we reach the end of this chapter, I want to express my gratitude and remind you to always take care of yourselves and trust your instincts. Thank you for being a part of this adventure. And though this video may be ending, our story together is far from over. Until next time, thank you for everything. Take care and see you in the next video.